Hi everyone, welcome to What's Happening in Brazil. Let's start with the latest news from the country.
President Jair Bolsonaro's visit to the United States for the opening of the United Nations Assembly was extremely controversial. Bolsonaro is unvaccinated, therefore he can't have meals inside restaurants. His speech was full of lies, and one day before the Brazilian committee returned to Brazil, the health minister, Marcelo Queiroga, tested positive to COVID-19. Queiroga, who is a doctor, has been following to the letter the president's denialist measures to tackle the pandemic. During his stay in New York, he made obscene gestures to demonstrators critical of Jair Bolsonaro. The minister will stay at a 5-star hotel in the U.S. city for the next 10 days. The Supreme Federal Court decided that states and municipalities are responsible for the vaccination of teens between 12 and 17 years old against COVID-19. Last week, the vaccination of this part of the population had been interrupted by the health minister at the request of President Jair Bolsonaro, but without the assessment by the National Health Surveillance Agency. The ministry justified the interruption by using the death of a teenager who was vaccinated 7 days before dying. The National Health Surveillance Agency and 70 doctors attested that the girl's death had no relation to the COVID-19 vaccine.
In the city of Manicoré, Amazonas state, a group of riverside dealers is overcoming logistic problems caused by the draw of the rivers to find and report the forest areas.
It was my grandfather who discovered the stand of Brazil nut trees. He passed it on to my father, who couldn't stand working anymore, and then he passed it on to me, and I'm working so far. Every 3 months, I come here to collect Brazil nuts. I was born and raised here. I feel honored to live in the forest, taking the fish out of the water and eating it right away.
Dionísio Pinto is a resident of Barro Alto, one of the 15 communities crossed by the Manicoré River. The Brazil nuts he and his family harvest are sold in the urban area of the city of Manicoré in the southeastern region of the Amazonas state. From there, the Brazil nuts go to Manaus and other parts of the country. But life has become scarce. In the last 15 years, sustainable extractive communities have come to live with land grabbing and illegal and predatory logging, which are threats to local ways of life. At the end of August, Brasil de Fato embarked with Dionísio and other riverside dwellers leaders to check the traces of deforestation, which is breaking records under Jair Bolsonaro's government. Unbelieving in the actions of federal inspection agencies, they organize and mobilize on their own to fight against the extinction of the forest and communities.
For many years, we've been preserving this land without taking any wood, just collecting nuts. And then a guy who isn't even from here comes and takes our land.
Early on, the expedition identified the landing point for the illegal logging. From these large clearings on the forest, loggers open roads that extend for miles into the woods. Some of the most targeted native species are angelim, ipê tree, and cedar, which ranges from 8 to 30 meters in height.
Aqui às margens do rio Manicoré.
Here on the banks of the river, we are in a place where the criminals invaded the area, felled the forest using tractors, and made a ramp to the river in order to be able to drain the illegally extracted wood from the Amazon rainforest, embark on rafts, and take it to the final destination.
These people need to look at the Amazon, which is being destroyed by big farmers. The government needs to be more committed. That's what we want for Amazonas.
In the 1920s, a man called Lampião and his group traveled throughout northeast of Brazil, seeking justice for sertanejos, as the people from the semi-arid northeast are known. Fighting against the big landlords, they use it to steal and mess around. Let's know a little about this story.
We are in Piranhas, in the semi-arid region of Alagoas State, northeast of Brazil. It was here, in this city, that the life of the most feared and influential cangaceiro of the Brazil's northeast region ended. Virgulino Ferreira, the Lampião, was captured by agents from the Polícia Volante, the police of those days, the 30s. His band was killed and had their heads exposed in the town square, which is, nowadays, the most visited place in Piranhas. Lampião was just an exponent of a movement that marked the history of the Brazilian Northeast. There are records of activities by cangaceiros since the 18th century. They used to move in armed groups throughout the cities of the Sertão. They used to loot, invade villages, and combat injustices. The heyday of the movement was in the 20th century, when, for decades, they rivaled against the Volantes, a police usually working for big landowners.
Some newspapers and researchers attested that it was an epidemic what was happening. It was the cangaceiros epidemic. Bandits, Volanes who many times behaved as cangaceiros and committed crimes as ridiculous as the crimes cangaceiros used to commit.
The philosophy of cangaço inspired the writer Haroldo Veiga to create the character Laércio Ramalho, the protagonist of his most recent book, The Throne of Cangalha. The author transports the dynamics of cangaceiros from the 30s to the actions of a political militant who resists Brazil's military dictatorship between the 60s and 80s.
I created a character which had lived in this period and who acquired all that psychic inheritance from cangaço. When he reaches adult life and goes to the capital city in the 1960s, he faces the government's military truculence, and then all that psychic charge that he acquired when he was a child, he exteriorizes through armed struggle.
The work addresses social subjects such as migration, prostitution, and civil disobedience, and exposes the authoritarianism and censorship experienced during the military dictatorship.
Now it's time for Brazilianism.
This is a recipe for reusing bread. It can be made with common French bread, but the best bread to make it is the Italian one or another slow fermenting bread, as they are leaner. Therefore, when they receive the moist seasoning, they remain intact and do not fall apart. You make it like this. Sprinkle water on the bread cubes. Salt and toast them in a frying pan without any fat, stirring constantly to make them evenly brown. Put apart the toasted cubes. In a bowl, add tomato, onion, olives. Add the parsley and season with salt, black pepper, and olive oil. Put together the bread dices and mix it well. Finish with the coarse grated Parmesan and mix lightly. You know that I am enthusiastic about the integral reuse of food. Real food is never left over. We enjoy everything and everything is good. But please do not romanticize poverty and hunger with reuse tips. One thing has nothing to do with the other. It is the same as closing your eyes against the food insecurity that is raging across the country and that leaves people with no other option but to consume food that they would not choose to eat. In a country with the size and weather of Brazil, it is absurd to suffer from hunger and to romanticize a queue in search of bones.
Did you like the show? So hit the like button and share with your friends. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to receive notifications. We'll see you next week.